Hi,
Dan,
how
nice
are
to
you?
nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
Well, looking forward to this. Uh, this is my fourth session in a row. Joel needs to be given a he is he has put me through four. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I haven't been doing that much talking, so it's good. Um,
As long as you have coffee, you'll be okay. You'll might make it through. Just last one, last one. There you go.
what time is it there for you?
6 o'clock a.m. It's 6. So it's still dark out. I'm sure the sun will rise as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, very good, very good. Um, Good. Well, listen, I love reading your stuff. You're prolific,
Thank you.
really prolific. And portfolios is definitely an area that I've looked into in a lot of detail.
Good, good. Good. That'll help me as well. I mean, it's still in many ways a nebulous area and one that's still being created. So a lot of dialogue needs to be
Yeah,
playing out.
you're right. It is. It's because technology systems have embedded the past, learning management systems,
Mhm.
and that's part of the problem.
Mhm.
So just
So it's question and answer, or
yeah,
diet conversation, I imagine.
yeah, yeah.
We just take it from there. Fantastic.
We've got about 150 people registered for the conference, so we've been having 10 to 20 people per session, but I think we'll see how many. It's the end of the day a little bit. Hopefully we'll get a few more.
If you were just talking about people joining, aren't you glad I'm still stalking you, Sanjay?
You are stalking me.
Hour after hour. So sorry about that.
We can have a drink after this. This will be.
No, absolutely. This absolutely deserves the beer.
Yeah, it does. Jordana, meet Ben.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you.
Jordana's working for a new school network that's very innovative and called Portal Schools.
Oh.
Yeah. Trying to get off the ground.
I'll look it up.
We're in Los Angeles.
Right.
So my
background.
Sorry about the dog.
So Portal Schools, what's the what are we trying to get off the ground in order to, I mean, what's the vision? What's the idea?
Yeah, we're a career competency. So we're embedded with right now with Belkin, for example. So Belkin is our partner, and we are literally embedded in their campus. So our school is in with Belkin. So we do the career centered learning. We have mentorships with them and lunch and learns, and a big part of our teaching is about career competencies in addition to high school diploma. It's dual enrollment, so the kids have a pathway to get a BA and their high school diploma at the same time.
Cool.
Jordana, Milken Community High School.
Excuse me?
Milken School, did you say?
Oh, Belkin, Belkin, people who make your adapters and.
Got it.
Yes.
All right, Ben, we're going to get started. So I think a few more people will join as we get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Sanje Ratnavale, president of OESIS, and delighted to be joined from Asia by Ben Freud. And Ben and I are going to have a discussion about an article that he wrote, which is great, on what if we used impact portfolios as evidence of our potential. Ben, welcome. And thank you for participating in Intrepid. You've written a lot for us, and we really appreciate your thoughts. Always pushing us, always pushing us. I think I have to tell you, one of the lines that I love most in one of your articles, and I told Joel to use it recently, is "Are schools at the end of their product life cycle?" That is a really, really good question. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about portfolios. So let me kick it off with a question. Tell me how you think that portfolios help to bring in the community, in a sense, right, into the conversation of learning, and how other voices are really brought into the discussion, into the learning experience in that way. Can we start with that?
Sure, and I guess there's different kinds of portfolios out there. If we think about the need for portfolios or what the need has been identified, it's been a question of going beyond the letter grades that may or may not mean something. An A in English may be different in my class than in your class. So portfolios are there to show more evidence of work and what the thinking might be, and maybe selected pieces of thinking that might want to be showcased. That in itself might not necessarily bring in the community. Perhaps if there are student-led conferences or some kind of conversation around that, then we can open up the floor to communities. But that in itself isn't portfolio-based. That is more of an implementation or some kind of process around utilizing the portfolios as facilitators of conversation. So the idea of portfolios of impact or portfolios of contribution, I don't really know what the word should be, but they do make a difference, or it does make a difference. I'll get into in a minute. That's a little bit different. Traditional portfolios are the ones that we maybe think of. We have a website, we put up our favorite work, our favorite math test, our favorite English story. That doesn't necessarily bring in the community. That's all about, this is what I've done, this is my fine polished piece of work. But a portfolio of impact is about shifting gears here and thinking about how our actions impact others, how they contribute to the community. It is telling the story of what we do and how it benefits others. So in that sense, they naturally bring in the community because it's no longer about necessarily focus on us. It's about the interaction with the community and what we do to benefit others. For instance, I could see a portfolio of impact being more of a story around, I don't know, building a shelter for animals, for stray animals, or maybe it could be about having a hydroponic system where some of the food goes towards homeless shelters. And so in that sense, the portfolio of impact isn't about my favorite math test. It's about actions that go and benefit others, underpinned by the learning, by the process, by evidence of work there. So in that sense, the portfolios of impact bring in the community because they are about the community.
So do you think that when a student, and perhaps we should define really what we mean by a portfolio. I mean, I think there's such a breadth here, but do you think that when a student is looking at their continuum, right, whenever that portfolio kicks in, and it might kick in kindergarten, it might kick in sixth grade, it might just be, it might move from a different one to another. Do you think that they should be intentional about thinking of their audience in a way that thinks my learning is going to be actually impacted by who I'm serving, as opposed to, I mean, I don't think that's what we do. I mean, that's not what we do in schools these days, right? I mean, it tends to be a much more selfish approach, sure, right? Our learning is our learning as opposed to our learning is a collective.
Now, this is a fantastic question and one that I've been thinking about a lot. So I've been thinking about it. I don't have an answer to it all because it's quite complicated. And it goes back largely to David Baum's work about what thinking is, the difference between thinking and thought. And really this misconception, because it is a misconception that learning is personal, doesn't really work because learning is a collective experience. We learn from each other. We learn from interactions with the world. We do not exist in isolation. So the fact that schools and the fact that you're bringing up selfishness is a misconception of what learning and thinking is, or what action is, because we don't exist by ourselves. Therefore, everything that happens is a collective. So this shift in consciousness, this shift in understanding our own realities has to come first in order for us to break selfishness. None of my ideas that I've ever had have come in isolation. And even I think Emerson said something like, nobody thinks for themselves, and if they do, then they're sure to be misunderstood, because language is also something that we share. And if language is something that we share, nothing exists in isolation. So in order to define these portfolios, yeah, we have to think about the audience. But this goes back to another question. And again, these are very complex issues. Learning and thinking don't exist without other people, but they don't exist without action, and the two are related. There is absolutely no point in learning something if it's never put to use. No point. Learning comes through or is the value of learning comes through action. So for instance, if I learn about, I don't know, the refraction of light, that might be fantastic, but unless I do something with it, it has zero value. So everything that we do has to be put into use. And so this idea of community, this idea of thinking about others, that's part of this process of learning, these interactions of learning. But I think also there's a certain value and a certain ethics that might be attached to that, that if learning and action are connected, then how does that action, what decisions do we make to guide that action? And will that be based on a certain set of ethics? Will that be in terms of contributing, doing good for the world? There's a lot of different vectors here, but if we step back and make it in its simple form, wouldn't it be wonderful if we started to conceptualize learning as an interaction with other folks and we give ourselves to others? And that's where the portfolio of impact comes, is how does our learning and our action benefit others? And that shifts everything completely, because then it does become about that dynamic with the community. And
yeah,
community
but I think that, you know, the problem is that the transcript, which is the alternative, the alternative embodiment of learning, tends to be one that is more self-centered, right? Yeah. and so with a portfolio, you're trying to, as you say, capture action, and but actions lead to better actions, right? And ultimately to practices or skills, in a sense, right? The way I've always thought about it, and maybe this is not completely right, but beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions, practices, and then skills. So we need to be able to capture the continuum of how those actions grow into something. How can we do that with a portfolio?
So let's think about a concrete example. Let's go back to this, I don't know, it's off the top of my head. Let's say you have a group of kids who would like to do something to contribute to the homelessness or feeding the world. So they want to contribute to homelessness. It's something that's very important to them. That in itself tells a story about where the students are coming from, right? Because what our actions, our causes tell something about us, and that's part of our narrative. So a group of students come and want to do something about homelessness, and they develop a hydroponic system to grow food. They take half the food and sell it maybe to, I don't know, their neighbors, and then they take the money to reinvest in the business, and then take the other half of the food and donate it to a food bank. So here again, we have evidence. If this works, or as this works, we can document the learning through learning about hydroponic system, the science, getting the soil, negotiating prices, maybe taking out a loan, figuring out how to market. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes around this system. The narrative comes as we tell this story and we capture it along the way, not just the finished piece of work, but the story that comes here, interviews where we are, and that's where we see where the learning is. Where we bring in the community might be capturing the voices of those who benefited from that. Maybe the voice of those at the homeless shelter, at the food bank, maybe those who eat, capturing those voices so that they come in. So that it's no longer about this is what I've done. This is about people giving testimonials about how that has benefited. Testimonials about the learning, what they've observed. So that, for instance, if I'm the guide in this project, I give a testimonial about what I think. Well, I really think that, Johnny has grown tremendously in this way. The homeless person says, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have, some different greens here, and it's really made a difference to my life. So then we're opening up the voice to the whole ecosystem of what those actions have brought in. And in many ways, it's no different than what happens in the professional world, where we show a CV, not with all the stuff that we've learned, but bullet points about the impact that we have. We have testimonials, we have references. The mental shift isn't that big between this and what would happen in the professional world. And so when you bring up transcripts, yeah, that's an issue. But transcripts pose their own problems. Letter grades pose their own problems. This is a different speed. They might complement one another. I don't see why that wouldn't lend some depth to a traditional transcript. About saying these are some of the stories that I could put to the table in terms of who I am, what I've done, how I've worked with, and the people that I've impacted.
Yeah, I think you're saying something very interesting because, if you go back, and Joel just made a comment in the chat thread about art portfolios, right? Now, a piece of art generally tends to be part of a portfolio, has been for decades or hundreds of years. But that piece of art, when it's consumed, right, tells a story, as you said, right? And that story is different to different people, but the reactions to that story can benefit not only the people who consume it, but also the person who created it, right? And I think in today's world, we have the kind of means for that collective or that interaction, that loop to be captured in ways that we didn't in the past, digitally and in other ways, which means that we can start to see learning as much more interactive as opposed to, what's the word for it? Linear or unitary? I think that's the word for it. Is that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know if there's an industry standard right now for portfolio platforms. A lot of websites which you can upload your things. I don't know. Mastery Transcript, for instance, when you open up the competencies, you click on the link and then you see evidence of that work and that thinking. So we're already starting to accept this kind of a different layer of, I guess, a different layer of depth in terms of what that might be. I guess the issue here remains that it's still, from my perception, someone's going to tell me that there's other examples, and I welcome those tremendously, but it's still about my favorite piece of work. And that means that you're really just trying to differentiate. You're still stuck to this idea of a transcript. You're just trying to differentiate yourself from someone else by showing a different piece of work. Now, that could be very valuable because it does show what you can do. It's funny you bring up the art portfolio because I tend to think that if you show your favorite math test, it's really just a snapshot of what you did at a certain point. What might be different about art, or what might be different about, say, a photographer or an interior designer, is that then you are showing where your vision is. If you were showing, hey, I've designed this house, or these are the photographs that I've taken of a wedding, you show what you're capable of doing. So that's future focused, because this is the kind of vision that I have. This is what I'm capable of. But a math test really doesn't necessarily do that. It might, but it doesn't do as much depth as these are the values that I have, the causes that I support. These are the challenges that I've come up with, not just in a reflective kind of way, but again, bringing in the voices of other people. And another point that's very important to mention, and goes back to the selfishness, is that none of these projects are done in isolation. The hydroponics example is a group of kids. So the portfolios that we have also bring in the contributions of other people. And this is a radical shift. If you and I are working on a project together, you are part of my portfolio. You are part of my team. And that's going to irk a lot of folks. That's going to say, whoa, hold on a second, but we don't know how much work I did, how much work you did, and we don't know that. That's going to irk a lot of people. But again, going back to the professional world, when you deliver a product, when you work for Belkin, for instance, and you deliver an adapter, no one knows who contributed what on the other side. Your client doesn't know that. Mm-hmm. What we have is a finished product. So you are part of a team. And yes, there's going to be a certain amount of uncertainty, but why are we so focused on assessing the individual competencies of one person when we can think about learning and action as a collective, as part of a team, at least as another data point? I'm not saying it should be the only thing, but the ability of a team to deliver something is really, really important, because that shows, I'm not talking about collaboration skills, and I'm not talking about all those things. I'm talking about what we've done to make a difference. And I have worked with other people to do that. Again, it brings in the community. It's an addition to, not a replacement of, but it adds a different piece of thinking that, again, we are as a collective, we do work together, and it's not about individuals.
So Ben, how are you doing this in your classroom? How do you put this into practice? Given the constraints given the constraints, I mean, we all know what the constraints are.
Yeah. It's a challenge. I have a grade book where I'm supposed to put kids' individual grades. It's very, very challenging. So what I do, and this is recorded, so I'm sure it's no, I'm just kidding. What I do is I actually have it in two speeds. So I have to comply to the system of giving individual grades, but all the work that they do is in groups. At least in terms of this idea. So we document at the beginning. I take video footage and try to bring it in and try to take create stories around what they do, and the evaluation, the assessment. I generally have one criterion, which is make a difference, or I don't know, like something about making a difference. So for instance, in the last project that we did, which was about trying to get middle school kids to create, to tell the stories about the school towards other middle school kids. So kid talking to kid for admissions. So as videos, rather than adults talking to adults. The only criterion was how much have you influenced other folks, right? And so that's the impact, measuring the influence of actually, did you get kids to change their mind and come to the school? In this sense, that's the impact. And so, the assessment comes in teams of trying to say, okay, your video convinced X number of people to come to the school. Another way to look at it, which might actually be easier than some of these kind of cobbled together systems, because I work in a system that doesn't necessarily allow that, is working with net promoter scores. Now, this is really a fascinating example because we've all gone on, say, a software program or something where they've asked you the question, how likely are you to recommend this? Yeah, and you have 0 for 10. And it sounds all cute, but there's a real formula behind this about having, advocates and detractors and folks that are neutral. If we can look at net promoter scores as a way of evaluating impact, then we actually have a number that's associated to that. Now, quantitative measures are pretty useful in the sense that if we have a 65 out of 100, that's generally seen as a pretty good net promoter score. But what do we do to get to 70? What do we do to get to 75? This is where we go back to the idea of that you had about the needs of who you're impacting. What is it that we have done that that can get us, that we haven't been able to go to a bigger number? So then we start to have a dialogue with the user base. So that's one way that can be implemented, because the impact is actually very easily reduced. I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but brought back to these net promoter scores. We're going to do that as well.
So you're really talking about a social validation process in many ways, I think, because if you are impacting a wider group of people, and you are working on a project, or you've worked on a project, and someone's consuming the product of that process, right? If they like it, then that tells you a certain element of their assessment. If they like it in comment, it tells you an even more, because they're taking the time to do something, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what you're saying, right, is that there needs to be some kind of assessment umbrella that is tied communally or more broadly to a portfolio, because a portfolio by itself does not achieve that goal, and the assessment process needs to be wider than just a kind of teacher-student assessment process. It needs to be something that's almost like social, right?
I mean, what is the point of learning if we're not taking action? And I would say, from an ethical point of view, what is the point of learning if we're not doing good for the world? Now, that's my own value base. I get that. But to me, it's about, it's about shifting the conversation towards action that hopefully benefits others. And by benefits others, I don't mean, necessarily benefiting the banks or whatever, but really benefiting the community and trying to shift our consciousness. I agree. I mean, why not bring in the voices of other folks? Again, if we have an assessment criterion of we are trying to save, or we set out to save 100 stray cats, then we have kind of a quantifiable measure of whether or not we were able to do that. But also we can bring in the voices of the community saying, well, they worked really well together, or the cat shelter has really inspired others, or whatever that might be. If we use net promoter scores for the cat shelter, it might be somebody putting in, yes, I think that this project, in the way it was done, is something that I would recommend. Again, these are nebulous areas. I don't have a perfect model, because they'll depend on the individuals, and this is about constructing it together. This is an idea to put forward that can be built with others. But I can see that bringing in the voices of others and the impact that has had on others, and the assessment of the project from others, is tremendously important. Why are we doing things if it doesn't help others? And why is the teacher the sole key holder, particularly when we have a system of standardization of assessment, or at least measures of assessment that frankly, restrict us as well?
Yeah. Jordana, you should come in on this conversation. I was just talking with your colleague about this and portfolios. And I mean, I think one of the challenges, Ben, I've looked at a lot of the digital portfolio platforms, and some of them have tried to do what you're suggesting. The problem is not so much the concept, it's what you have to get rid of to get to the concept, right? Because you're dealing with the great book and all that kind of stuff. So there was a portfolio system called Portfolio, which had a social media component to it, where you could actually share your projects, and the projects could be assessed or commented on, and you can actually assess the project jointly too. Unfortunately, it didn't take off, simply because there was just too much of a barrier to all the things that are stopping us right now. So what they decided to do is to try and make it a little easier from an assessment point of view, and they gave various different kinds of assessment tools. So you could assess a project on a normal basis, just as a grade, or as a star rating, or as on a rubric, or what have you, until you got to that point. Even that didn't work. And the reason that it didn't work is because the people who were doing their normal courses were still not thinking in a kind of project way. So I think from a portfolio perspective, it's important for it to be a kind of project, right? But we have to find ways to make it more meaningful, to be able to command that value, the value of the action, the value of all that stuff. Does that make sense?
And I hear what you're saying, and I can see the problems of having outside people assess a project without having any context. So I want to be careful to say that it's not outside people who assess it. It's not different people. It's the people who are impacted by the project, the people who work with the cats, the people at the homeless shelter. Those folks are the ones who provide parts of the story and the narrative about how it impacted and how that experience was well, just that experienced, because that at least has context. It's a perspective, but at least they're part of that action. I would have a hard time taking a project and assessing it with stars when I don't know the context, the people, or anything like that. To me, that's even more harmful than having a teacher or be the sole assessor, because at least the teacher's in the classroom. And there's a certain, I mean, as we know with social media, there's a certain amount of distance, and it's really easy to, it can get quite distorted. But again, if we could capture the voices of those people who have been impacted, and maybe they do the Net Promoter Score, I don't know. Again, this has to be worked out, but certainly capturing their testimonials qualitatively, then that would be wonderful. We can even go post-qualitatively, and instead of capturing people's asking them questions or things like that, we could just capture images, reactions, have a third person maybe capture scenes and put that as part of the portfolio. Show clips of someone delivering the food there. Showing someone capturing the children playing with the cats. There's so much that could be done here. Yes, there's a lot of problems here in terms of how that's going to be seen on the other side. But this is the kind of shift that we need, because it's not working now.
Sorry, it's a shift that your approach is very different, because your approach is making it a value to the learner. What most portfolios do is it makes it a value to someone who's consuming it for another purpose, such as getting into college, right? Or some kind of designed process that usually is kind of backward designed for a particular purpose. If you're making it for the learner themselves, who ultimately learns more from their action as a result of the actions of others, then that's a bit of a holy grail, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I do think it could be also for the person, the college admissions, assuming of course the university is where people would go, which, that's another conversation altogether, or the employer or anyone. Because there's a lot of kids who don't succeed academically. They're not interested. They're thinking on other ways. And so what if I was able to tell a story, even though I might be a B average kid, but what if I was able to tell a story about all the things that I've done outside of the classroom, or maybe within the classroom, but physically outside of the classroom to help other people. These are the causes that I believe in. This is the drive that I have, the determination. This is how I've made other people's lives better. Now that tells a whole different story than somebody who's got a 3.2 GPA. It gives you an idea about their values. Now we also have to understand that universities, assuming that you're going to university, they're actually not as interested in the input as they are in the output, because they want people to go out and make a difference after universities, because that looks good on them. They want them to be CEOs. They want them to be, discoverers and everything like that. It's about the output. So to make sure that we have the highest quality output, we have to make sure we have the highest quality input. And so in a world right now where we have more and more people who are, especially young people, who are becoming conscious of the danger of the planet, about the way we treat each other, about all these social tensions that are there, telling the story about how I have helped others, how I care, how I interact with the world is so much more powerful if we have time to look at it than an A or a B.
Well, I think you just said it. The problem is having time to look at it. Those college admissions people there, unfortunately, don't have the time to look at it, right? And that's why I see this approach as being of more benefit to the learner than the current people who are consuming it. But Jordan, you obviously have something to say here. Come in into this conversation, please.
I have to just also say I appreciate your dog, as mine is about to go barking too. It must be that time. My initial thought was around design thinking and about how this idea of an impact portfolio, a big part of design thinking, which I think from my experience in teaching has been better than just PBL, right? Off the bat, you're looking from designing a solution from a point of empathy. So you're really looking at a problem and how it affects the user and what that user experiences and what that user needs. Does the user actually want green? Like, does the homeless person want greens, or like, what really does that homeless person want? And as I've taught design thinking in Los Angeles, we've done work with our unhoused populations out here, and we've gotten those reactions. We've gotten that informal feedback the students have and share that as part of their project. Like, that's what we do. So I think that has a lot of traction, and I think it's a really nice way to make what I'm seeing is a lot of people love PBL because it's engaging, but not meaningful. So sometimes we get into these like savior project places, and they're not actually meaningful to what the real needs of the community are. And I feel like an impact portfolio like what you're talking about might be a way to drive that more authentic experience. That's kind of what I was thinking about.
So this is really interesting. You bring up design thinking. So going back to the time really quickly, the time with college admissions, that's a systemic issue. That's a college admissions issue. And if they are going to pick people based on grades, and that's going to be the system, then that's a bigger conversation. This is an alternative to maybe go deeper and know the person. This Jordan brings us to your comment. So that's a systemic issue, and I have trouble saying, oh well, we can't do anything because we don't have time. We just have to work and redesign that system. But very interesting about design thinking, and that's that empathy piece. And I think design thinking risks sometimes being very linear, very problem solution based. And even maybe very colonial. In this case, what you're saying about the Greens in a homeless shelter. Now, I brought this up because it's at the top of my head, but ultimately it's like we are coming in and telling you what you need to eat, and that might not resonate. It can be very colonial. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. One of the things that design thinking, I believe, is missing is a step before empathy. Because before we can empathize with someone, we have to understand what our mental models are. And there has to be discussion about what I bring to the table, what are my values, what are my mental models, and how does that impact the way I can empathize with others? Because empathy isn't just, oh, hey, I understand other people, we come in with something. And so an impact portfolio would really work with that, because if we can add those mental models, that would add yet another layer of understanding of who the person is, or even their ability to reflect on their mental models, which is so important.
How would we add mental models into the portfolio?
Well, we all have mental models. We all come in with mental models, and that's okay. I'm not, we have to have mental models,
I agree.
but it's about reflection on those, talking about what that might be. Maybe at the beginning, we talk about some of the mental models. Maybe the mental models are a thread that go throughout each project. I'm using the word project for expediency, but maybe over the course of time, we also have a parallel documentation about those mental models and how that might shift. Because ultimately, what would be amazing is at the beginning, we talk about our mental models, and at the end of the project, if there's a beginning and then, we can talk about how those might have shifted. That's learning right there. The delta is the learning as well. So these are, we can do so much with these rich experiences. There is a question of time. I get that. Maybe
I'm not, yeah.
I
don't care about the college admissions officers either. And I think that is the key of these impact portfolios. They're a springboard to reflection, and reflection is the key to learning, because ultimately you develop those metacognitive skills that are going to help you. But I think I'm also more interested in how this becomes more community based, right? Because
let's put it this way: you're started Intrepid Ed News. You work with the team, and you have you try to get readership, eyeballs, and everything like that. You have conferences like such.
Yeah.
If you were to leave the job and go to someone else, you would have said, this is how we've impacted the business. This is how I've grown the business. These are some of the contributors that I've brought in. This is some of the shifting that I've had. I have learned this and that. So your next employer would be looking at the impact that you've had at Intrepid Ed. Mm-hmm. That is what you would bring to the table. And that's a completely normal process with employers. So why is that so different in schools? Why is it so difficult to shift towards that thinking? Is it the fact that there's a sheer number of applicants to a university? I mean, there could be a huge amount of applicants to a job as well. So it's really not that different, because you would never think about going to a job interview without saying how you've made Intrepid Ed better, how you left it better off than what it started with. So it's the same kind of conversation, same thinking.
Yeah, and I think you made a point, I think, in the article about understanding what the people who you're making an impact on need, right? What they need from you. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's the piece that's often lost in schooling. You don't understand what other people need from you, as opposed to what you need from whatever it is that you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's critical. And again, that's the same thing in business. And I don't want to bring everything back to business, because I certainly don't think that, we're learning in order to get jobs. I want to get away from that. But even if it's what your family members need, even if what's your dog needs or your employer, it doesn't matter. There is, again, that interaction between us. I'm bringing something to the table that you hopefully will find valuable. Again, it goes back to this idea that learning and action have to come hand in hand. There is zero value in learning if it's not put into action. In fact, learning can't exist unless it's put into action, because learning is about whether it's adaptive learning or generative learning. There has to be something associated to it. So that interaction with the world, with the planet, with others is critical. So yeah, it is about what we need. If I do anything and there's no need, then it just fizzles out. There's no point. I can make up, the Apple does great products now. They also came out with the Apple Newton. It didn't work because people didn't have that need. There was no market for it, so it just evaporated. Maybe other things came out as benefits, but so be it. So yeah, the need is really important, and that's a shift in consciousness too.
It is.
You're absolutely right. But it's massive.
But it's a shift in consciousness, because in schools, learning is considered to be an impact, one impact. Right? The grade is one impact. Whereas what you're saying is that the impact is actually potentially different in all kinds of different people who will see, we need a violinist, right? Or we need this person, or we need a an expert on this, that, or the other, and therefore your impact through your portfolio is a function of their need rather than what you have learned.
Yeah, it's the same thing as having potential and kinetic energy. What I've learned is the potential energy, it becomes kinetic energy when I put it to use to the benefit of other people, or at least to the benefit of the world. It's completely different. If I know how to do all these things in math, that's fantastic. That's me centered. That's the grade. The grade shows that I've got all this potential, but unless it's transformed into that kinetic energy, what's the point? And what's the point ethically? And really, do we not want, some of us, this isn't for everyone, because I think that, one of the things that is dangerous about talking about the future of school and school reform is that we tend to think that it's going to be everything for everyone. But it's actually for those who accept this, those who would like to go forward in this idea that, what we do should be to the service of others, should be to the service of the community, to make the world a better place. And by that might be just making sure the planet doesn't burn. It's a shifting consciousness, but it's an important one. And unless we go towards that, we will be stuck in these selfish models of me first. The whole idea of portfolios is based on a world of scarcity, not abundance. We need portfolios because we need transcripts, because there's a certain number of positions available, but a wider number of applicants. If there was the same number of applicants as there were positions, or whatever it might be, then we wouldn't need these things. So because it's about scarcity, that naturally develops selfishness. So what can we do to move beyond that? What can we do to say, I'm the best person for this job, or I'm the best person for this application? Those are the transitions that we need to think about. But doing good for the world, for those who are on board, that's an important shift of consciousness.
I think it also leads us to a different problem. And that is that your impacts are potentially going to be perceived in ways that are biased.
Yeah.
And so you might think you have the ability to have an impact, but the person who's receiving it might be biased in thinking that your impact because of their biases, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, there has to be a movement in this process to eliminate bias from those impacts. And that's what some of the things that have taken place that I don't like have tried to move towards, such as standardization, standardized tests, which is really kind of started with the hope of getting rid of bias, but ended up actually being the most biased of all tools. That was the whole purpose of standardized testing in the first place. But then it ended up with everyone who could afford tutoring and all that kind of stuff manipulating the system. So I feel like as we go down a different route where we're assessing actions and impacts, we have to find a way to eliminate that bias. Thoughts?
And that's the one that we have to, but can we? I'm a firm believer there's no such thing as objectivity, and those mental models that we bring, we might recognize them. And recognize them, reduces bias. There's a reason why the joke is on social media, there's a bazillion videos of cats, right? People love cats. And if your impact portfolio talks about how you saved, kittens, that will probably get more buy-in, or I don't like the word buy-in, but more it would be more receptive to those people that sick kittens than if I say, oh, I'm helping bacteria in the soil because it helps, growing amount of plants. So that's going to create bias because, we're telling different stories, and one of them I connect to more emotionally, naturally, because kittens are cute and bacteria is not. So I don't know what to do about that. And I don't know if that can be changed. At the same time, we also bring in people who have our values. A company would never bring in someone who openly says, I have different values than what the vision is, assuming that the vision is actually means something, not just words on a wall. You want to bring people who can fall into that vision, whose personal visions can match the shared vision. So that's an issue about what the values are. Is it an issue or is it normal? I don't know. That's, again, something that we can talk about in dialogue about how to overcome this. One thing that I wonder about, again, I don't have answers, and this isn't a definitive, is if we put the actions and the impact first, would that reduce some of the biases that we might think typically? racial bias, gender bias, socioeconomic bias. Because if I'm saving kittens, does that come to the forefront rather than maybe the color of my skin? Whereas if we do it more on a personal level about this is my favorite math test, then that might increase. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that, but I would hope that putting action first in the voices of those that have impact might make the other things secondary, or at least make them less important. I don't know. But again, then it becomes about the actions and impact on community rather than about the self. I'm hoping that opens the door.
Yeah, Mary, did you have a question for us? Yeah, Mary? No. There's a there's a system, Ben, called the Comprehensive Learner Record, which is part of the IMS Global Consortium, and I'm on the board of IMS, and it's the main kind of nonprofit that integrates all these things. But the Comprehensive Learner Record basically takes the information on any actions or any learning and transmits it through a standard, so it can be transmitted to anyone who you want to transmit it to. The learner can transmit that, and what they do essentially is enable that learning to be asserted by the person who's actually achieved it. Now, if you're able to correlate all that learning, all those actions, all that learning in a way that had some kind of standardization to it, and then anonymized it, right? In the same way that PayPal anonymizes the payment process. You know, when you pay, but with PayPal, you don't really know who's paying, right? It could be a credit card, it could be a debit card, it could be cash, it could be anything. And you transfer that assertion to the colleges, and then they didn't know what the identity of the person is, the skin color or what have you. Then you have a way of actually reducing the bias. But that's a little bit off.
But that's really interesting. That's really, now I don't know how that would work in terms of this idea of telling the narrative, because that, you know, the documentation of the learning and those mental models might you know, be a video. But those are details, and I'm sure that can be fixed.
There's evidence, and there's correlation, etc. We're running out of time, so let me get to a few questions. Joel, do you want to unmute and ask a question? Joel, you have a hand up. Is that not a question? You're on mute. You're on mute. There you go. You're still on mute. Anyone else? Well, we're trying to get Joel's. Yes. Go ahead, Jordana.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak to the opportunity for authentic and relevant learning experiences, like how in creating an impact, like in making an impact portfolio and considering how we can make an impact, how that would create more authenticity and relevancy in our classrooms.
Yeah, and I guess we have to define what authenticity means. So in its most simple form, something that actually would exist in the real world. It has an impact and something that makes a difference. I think by nature, working on something that should have an impact for others outside the classroom, that makes it authentic. If we do something that is there to help others and that there's a need for it, there is a reason for it, that makes it authentic. Even if there's no need, it doesn't mean that it's not authentic, because oftentimes people do things or companies create products that there's no need, but at least it would exist in the real world. So I think it comes naturally with it, because we're starting to think about someone else, and that someone else is that public performance, is that need. And again, going back to your question about design thinking, you know, design thinking could be a tool to get to that, and in that kind of way. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it certainly could be one. And I think design thinking itself lends itself to authenticity.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, because I was thinking that this is more like an application of, this is a portfolio of an application of knowledge rather than like a demonstration of knowledge and skills. It's like true application. Like,
but it would be because everything is about the impact that we had. So that's the application. The demonstration of knowledge is part of it, but everything is about what that learning and those actions have done to the world, the benefit that it's done to the world. It is naturally an application. It is, again, with your school that you're starting, you are impacting the world by bringing in learners, by having them go out in the world and make a difference. Ultimately, I'm sure that the way what you want with career competency is to have them make a difference in their companies. That's the impact. And in fact, in your case, and I might be speaking out of turn, but I bet that the impact isn't felt while they're in school. It's felt when they're finally getting a job or when they're influencing their community outside. And you learn about that impact years later as you form them. So now we're talking about a different span of time, that the impact that you have maybe comes out long after they've graduated. And whether or not that could be part of your portfolio of impact, the impact that you have when they're not even with you.
Right. No, I see that, and I've totally experienced it myself. I was thinking it more connected to the college admissions thing again, which would be like, wow, this portfolio is actually better than other portfolios because this is actual application of knowledge, not just a demonstration of knowledge. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Understood. Thank you.
Joe?
So I'm going to pick up on that and also talk about, Benjamin, I think we've talked about this before. You said before, you sort of were apologetic about the fact that you were giving examples from the business world, but I think you don't have to apologize for that, because the business world is emulating the way that people learn for most of history. In other words, you started as an unskilled person, you became an apprentice, you worked with somebody who was skilled, and you improved your skills until you weren't an apprentice anymore, until you had more expertise. Okay, in the K through 12 world, and probably in higher education to a great extent too, that concept barely exists. Instead, we've created this concept for mass education called scope and sequence. And the message of scope and sequence is, kid, you can't do anything until you know all of this stuff. Then maybe we'll let you try something. Because if you try it sooner, you will fail. And God knows we don't want you to fail. We want you to succeed. That is such a shift in mindset from what's required to get your impact portfolio, that we need to probably take closer looks at businesses. And I think that's why Portal is doing what they're doing. How about if we live inside the walls of a business?
Yeah.
Because you're a great model for learning.
And I think, you know, I'm with you, Joel, completely. The reason why, so I'm with you. It's a great model. The learning happens in different ways, in businesses. Impact, everything that we do is done different in business. The only reason why I was apologetic is because, you know, if we talk only about business, we're missing out. Well, I don't want to make it seem that we, you know, that kids are on this path towards just being, you know, fodder for capitalism or just going in there to make money, right? We live in a world where we have to also treat each other well, our families, our communities. You know, learning is so much beyond just getting a job. So I'm conscious of the fact there's a narrative that it's go to K-12, go to university, get a job. And that linear path, it's much more than that. So that's where the distinction is.
I think the good news is that the treating each other well and all the other things that are not usually part of business is coming crashing back into the business world. So, you know, in many ways, it's kind of, there's a good convergence going on. More questions? Any other final thoughts, Ben? We're at the 50-minute mark. Any other final thoughts on this area?
No, my final thought is that, you know, I really hope that anything in the world, like, I know these are inchoate ideas, they're things that are coming, and we can build these with dialogue. Not just, you know, in many of these places, people just propose these models and these solutions, and we could take them forward, but it's actually just about creating it together and understanding these aren't models, they're frameworks. They're ways that we can come to think together, and then they become models once they get a little bit more traction. So it's about co-creation and building it together. But I think that really the one thing that we need to do is shift that social consciousness towards doing good for the world. That's really fundamental to anything. Doing good for the world, for others, for ourselves, rather than trying to one up each other by these snapshots of what I've done in the past and how I'm better than you, and breaking that selfishness that you very rightly and courageously brought up.
Unmute myself. Thanks a lot, everybody. This has been a fascinating discussion and at a much higher philosophical and other level than we normally are able to get to, but also at a very practical level, because I think you can never really get anywhere if you don't bridge that gap properly. So appreciate you, Ben, and thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.